Love you the Bible?
1692. A merciless witch hunt in the New World.
She must be under some evil hand.
A community of pious Puritans in New England believed the devil was among them.
Tell me, who does come into my house?
That's a ghost. Here, in this house.
Order! Why do you hurt these children?
I have not hurt them.
Did you bring a black man with you today?
I'm an innocent person.
The devil hath been raised in Salem village.
Anyone and everyone among them might be a witch and Satan's willing helper. There was no stopping the religious madness. It was to cost many lives and leave the community in Salem riddled with guilt.
Cannot one of you look me in the eye?
It was a major fall from grace at the very beginning of American history, and to this day, many questions have gone unanswered. These girls are the grandchildren of the Pilgrim Fathers, who in the first half of the 17th century set sail from England and Holland for the east coast of America. Free of persecution, they wanted to live out their ideal of a devout Christian community.
The dogs delight to bark and bite, for God hath made them so. Let bears and lions growl and fight, for 'tis their nature too. But children, you should never let such angry passions rise. The little hands were never made to tear each other's eyes.
Samuel Parris' daughters and nieces were among them. Parris was the leading minister in Salem, New England. What would today be considered an innocent game by children was a shameful lapse for these strictly devout Puritans. All people are deeply sinful, even the children, and forever tempted by the devil.
It has everything to do with us. You know, we still live in a moment where we are afraid of people we don't understand. And I think that's one reason why it's important to keep talking about Salem, why it's important that we don't let it be consigned to the past.
There's probably a theory for every day of the year as to what happened because of that, because people have been wondering for over 300 years what happened.
It's not fun and games. It's not trick-or-treat and Halloween, which is all very well by itself, but it's a serious lesson to learn from it.
Salem is on the edge of the English Crown Colony. It is threatened to the north by the French, who have Native American tribes on their side. Together, they attack the outlying settlements and slaughter the inhabitants. Any survivors flee southwards to Salem. In the eyes of the devout Puritans, the French and the Native Americans are one and the same, the boogeyman, the devil incarnate, who lurks in the woods.
Imagine that we live in that world and we know that there are evil forces out there and that they look to harm us, but we can't even say for sure who they are, who the bad guys are.
All things foreign, all things unknown spell danger. There is no safety or security.
We have Indian attacks. We have refugees, we have incidences of witchcraft already taking place. And the general sense amongst Puritans is simply, when bad things happen, like these things, They don't happen with no reason. There is always a reason why bad things happen.
Ultimately, everything that happened, your dog dies, your cow gets sick, your child is sick, your house burns down, you're suddenly in pain, all these things have to have some meaning connected to something much bigger than you, God, or possibly Satan.
Certain that they were sinful down to their very depths, each person had to be immensely strict with themselves, or so the Puritans believed. Salvation would only come to the pure, who took biblical doctrine as their guideline in life. To lead a diligent, simple, and morally pure life, that was the duty of every member of the Salem community.
They talked about religion all the time in the context of everyday life. Every turn of the weather, every interaction is informed by a religious understanding. So I think today we use religion as a category of discourse that is unto itself, whereas at that moment, religion informed every analysis of how the world worked.
And the Bible provided the instructions. It was tough being a child in this small and narrow-minded world. The excitement of the forbidden. Who would not gladly cast a glance into the future, even if the minister condemned such practices as the work of the devil?
They produced what was called at the time an English form of folk magic called a Venus glass. They would fill a glass with water, and then they would suspend in the water an egg white.
To see what their future husbands would be, what they'd be doing for a living, because that would affect a woman's role in life.
There's something out there. It's just called firelight through the glass.
These girls knew that telling the future was not something that good Christian girls were expected to do, especially in the home of a Puritan minister. That was something that was forbidden. And as a result of that, things start to devolve.
The New England Puritans' entire lives amounted to one prolonged religious service. It was religion that structured communal life. Joy and any sensory pleasure was considered satanic temptation.
So there's no absolution in the Puritan system and no system of confession. And what this does is to make it an internal process. It's inside you. This is what the minister is saying in his sermons. Look inside yourself, and you're going to find unrepented sin. That's the downside of the Puritan system. So much emphasis on sin, so much emphasis on understanding, looking inside yourself, but no real outlet for all the turmoil that creates, that causes.
Everybody had to answer personally and directly to God. They were left alone with whatever tormented them.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Repressed passions, anything ugly or dirty, came under the same injunction.
For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory,
forever and ever. Amen.
Had God forsaken Salem?
Something, don't let it throw it in the fire!
Oh Lord, heaven, take Satan from this child! Do not!
What do you see?
Child, stop thy mouth! Stop thy mouth!
A timeline of the Salem witchcraft trials must begin in very early 1692. That's really where things begin to get out of hand. The girls in Reverend Parris's home begin to act strangely.
I cannot hold her!
Do you see it? Do you see it?
God is angry and Satan is coming and he's going to destroy us. And these little girls are terrified. And under the circumstances, I think they probably converted their mental anguish gets converted to physical symptoms. And this is not fakery.
What do you see? Who is it?
God! Or the woman. No!
They're very often called the afflicted children or the afflicted girls. And the word afflicted simply means that they were experiencing the oppression, the presence of evil forces. They did not want to listen to prayers being said. They did not want to listen to the Bible being read. They were acting in such an aberrant way that Reverend Parris, as you would expect, brought in the local physician, I believe it was Dr. William Griggs, and asked him to see if these girls had some type of malady. Were they sick? Was there something physically wrong with them?
They couldn't make sense of it medically. This is in the 17th century, and I don't know of any 20th century, 21st century interpretation that cuts any ice at all.
In the 1970s, there was a popular theory that people bring up to me all the time still, which was about ergotism. This suggested that the Salem witch trials could be explained away by the fact that all the afflicted little girls had eaten moldy rye bread and were hallucinating.
And that took off because it was a natural form of LSD, and LSD was a new thing in the news then. The thing is, the month after the article came out, it was rebutted in the same journal by two other scientists who pointed out that convulsions can be caused by the ergot poisoning.
It sounds wonderful, but it doesn't work on so many ways. It's like medicine today, you know, just take a pill and I'll feel better. People like that kind of solution. It doesn't work for Salem. Is it possible that one or two people had some of those kinds of symptoms? Yes, but that doesn't explain why you have, you know, dozens of people accusing people of being witches throughout the region, you know. So, you know, there is no single explanation, I'm afraid to say. It's more complicated than that.
There is nothing wrong with her that any medicine I provide could cure. Indeed, she must be under some evil hand, causing all this pain, for all this affliction.
The really sad thing to me in Salem is that there were so many sort of like tipping points where things changed with so many people. Suppose if Reverend Parris had decided that, no, I'm not sure the doctor's right. I don't think these girls are afflicted. I think they just have some other illness, right? So when Reverend Parris determines that they're witches,
I actually feel quite sorry for her, because imagine what it's like to be an 11-year-old girl who is working all the time, and then for the first time in your life, all these big, important people, these people you've had to obey, they're all paying attention to you now.
here you have this great inversion in Salem where these young girls who were at the margins of society normally have taken center stage.
White magic was supposed to counteract the devil's designs. A neighbor of Reverend Parris persuaded his house slave Tituba to bake a magic cake. The most important ingredient, the girl's urine.
Tituba was born in Barbados, was probably of Carib Indian heritage. She was enslaved in Parris's household, and she would have been at the bottom of that community hierarchy at that time.
If a dog eats the magic cake, Then the witches will scream in pain and thus betray themselves, or so people believed. But the magic did not work.
It's certainly embarrassing for the minister's household to be attacked by witches, devils, whatever. I mean, you don't want to jump into that.
What does happen in my house whilst I am away?
I don't know.
Do not lie to me, child. Who is it that torments you?
I am no liar. The devil is the king of lies.
Then tell us who it is that is coming to ya. Who is it that pinches ya?
I don't know.
Love you the Bible?
Yeah.
Love you your prayer? Yeah. Then what afflicts thee? Who does come into my house and frighten thee? Which apparition comes to you in the night? Tell me the name, child. Tell me!
Tituba.
Exactly what was going through Betty's mind when she named Tituba, I don't know. But the parents, Reverend Parris, certainly didn't want that going on in his house. So he suspects her too.
Tituba's kitchen was a popular meeting place for the girls. The slave woman has many stories to tell.
Last night, while I was sleeping, I heard the same dreadful voice. Oh boy, come away, come away. And I woke up when I was looking for the voice. Nobody was there.
We know very little about Tituba except what happened during the witchcraft. If it weren't for the witchcraft events, she would have just fallen through the cracks of history and we would never have known even her name.
Well, one thing we do know is that they considered Tituba as a confidant and as a source of constant entertainment. I think she was a very important character in the role of the children's lives at home. They spent a good deal of time with Tituba and developed a close relationship with Tituba.
That's a ghost. It's a ghost. We have a ghost among us here in this house. Sent by the devil.
The fact that Tituba was the first accused is likely due to her lack of power within the household. The fact that she was there, and the fact that she wasn't going to be in a position to defend herself.
Tituba gets thrown into jail. But this does not stop the witchcraft. The visitations by the devil persist.
At night, she comes to me and pinches me and bites me, and she tells me that she will hurt me most dreadfully if I don't sign her book. And there's a black man who whispers in her ear.
Tituba, when pressed, when questioned, says, "The devil came to me and bid me serve him."
They say, how many witches are there? And she said, I saw 9 names in Satan's book.
That means there's more people out there. Who are they? And people start wondering, what other neighbor might be a witch? Who else is involved in this?
What do you think about that? I don't know. There could be witches. They say that there's these witches in Salem. I don't believe it. Does she have a familiar too? I don't see these things out loud. Why not?
The problem with Salem Village is it is a town that is torn. It is a town at odds with itself. There are groups of people on 2 different sides of the community, basically at war with themselves.
Well, imagine if you switch the word witch and terrorist. And I think you understand a bit the lesson of Salem, that in fact, we don't really know who the evil people are. And it's very hard for us to determine that today. They're very real. Witches were real in 1692. They could harm people. Just like today, terrorists are very real, but we're never quite sure who they are. They could be anybody. You know, it could be a neighbor or a relative who's a witch or is a terrorist.
Have you ought to spare today for someone who needs it?
I'm sorry, Goody, I got nothing for you today.
Not at all, just a little.
I'm sorry, I got to feed my own children, you
You're
know.
a wicked woman, you know that? God. I go with God, you see. I hope you and your family know what it is someday.
I think it's hard to be an outsider in any culture and at any moment in time, but it's pretty hard to be an outsider in 17th century Massachusetts.
There's no designed place for the outsider. There's the church. The outsiders are not really in the church, except accidentally. They're not part of the family structure. They're not part of the people you look for marriage partners with if you're, a good, solid person. But they are part of the legal system in the bad sense, in the sense of being troublemakers in the village.
Well, imagine if someone like Sarah Good came to my door. Perhaps I send her away. And going away, she's resentful and she's angry. And she says, "You're going to regret not giving me anything to eat today." And an hour later, my toddler is scalded with boiling water. Very common injury for women and children at this time period, and a potentially fatal one. Later on, if she is accused as a witch, I will see that correlation, those correlated events, as causal. I haven't lived through the scientific revolution yet. I won't know that correlation and causation are different. I will see that as an example of a threat followed by maleficium.
When the witch hunt begins, the outsiders are very, very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable to being accused of. That category of outsider mutates, just like that, into the category of witch.
What people thought a witch was somebody who was acting purposefully with the devil.
But not only people on the margins of society can be suspect. Satan is abysmally evil, a clever and ingenious seducer who seeks to bring about the downfall of the pious. Could it be that his disciples have adopted as their disguise the semblance of great righteousness? That was the bizarre logic of the time. The circle of those under suspicion grows. Even reputable members of the community now get suspected. Distrust, fear, and hatred do the rounds. The devil can be happy, that's for sure.
The most important thing, however, happened when a covenant member of the church was accused of witchcraft.
And Rebecca Nurse is a full member of the Salem Town Church. She's got a good reputation. She has a very supportive family, but she's accused too.
There being complaint this day made against Rebecca Nurse, the wife of Francis Nurse of Salem Village, for vehement suspicion of sundry acts of witchcraft.
I never did no witchcraft in my life.
Having done much hurt and injury to the bodies of Ann Putnam and Abigail Williams, you are therefore, in their majesties' names, required to apprehend and bring before us Rebecca Nurse.
I can say before my eternal Father that I am innocent. God will clear my innocency.
Go and get your belongings. Quickly now.
Everyone's very surprised when she's accused, and actually there's a list of people who sign their names saying that they know Rebecca Nurse's character and that this cannot possibly be correct, but it's not enough to save her.
Rebecca Nurse is not allowed much in her jail cell. A Bible to give her consolation. It is a tough test for this devout woman, yet she hopes to endure the animosity by remaining strong in her faith.
Come along, goody nurse. Come along. Up you go.
Anyone can be a witch, and you don't have to look like or act like a witch to be one. You can be secretive in your beliefs on witchcraft. And this really opened up the floodgates, so that in April and then in May, more and more people were being examined, thrown in jail.
Good day. Do you have the froll for my husband?
Hey, good wife, I do here.
Oh, lovely.
Check that handle, it's good.
Very good. Have you heard the rumor?
What rumor be that?
They're saying she bewitched her first husband to death.
I have heard that. And I have something to say to it. This same woman came to my house about, a month and a half ago. She had a bit of a spat with my wife. And a week later, our best milking cow died.
You don't say.
I do say.
'Tis a pity.
Something triggers this feeling of guilt inside people, this feeling of unresolved sin. And so what's the first thing you do with it? You project it onto somebody else. That's a psychological act. You project it onto somebody else. Not my sin. It's not my responsibility. It's somebody else's responsibility. And that leads you to the figure in the village or in the town that you name the witch.
I think it was witchcraft.
God help us.
God help us is right.
Well, thank you for this, sir. Good day.
You can only convict people of witchcraft on one of two types of evidence. One is a direct confession, or two is two eyewitnesses who can testify that they have seen this person commit an act of black magic. Now, since you and I know that black magic isn't real, it's hard to find two people to confess to that. So instead, they'll sort of bring all together this sort of pile of lesser evidence, and the sentiment is so real in Salem in 1692. People know from things that are going on in the colony that witchcraft is real and Satan is loose, and they are willing to accept this lesser evidence as proof that these people are witches.
For the accused, there was more at stake in such a witch trial than their position in the community and their standing. Statements by witnesses decided over life and death.
Basically, what they were giving in the way of testimony was called spectral evidence. Spectral evidence is evidence that is given about an affliction that you are experiencing, but from a force that no one can see. And in fact, sometimes only the individual who is being afflicted actually claims to see the individual or the spirit that is harming them.
If they hadn't used spectral evidence, and spectral evidence, the idea that the witch has a specter which it can send out and do mischief for it, and the thing that was afflicting the children, and the children would say the specter of this person or that person is choking them right now. No one else can see it, only the children can. If the Chief Justice William Stoughton had said, I'm not going to accept that evidence because two people cannot confirm it. It's only something that an accuser says. That would have ripped the guts out of the witchcraft accusations.
the Salem episode was not carefully handled. And I have to say that procedurally, there were some things done which compromised the real sense of fairness and the sense of justice being carried on here. It became a form of entertainment.
Order! What evil spirit have you familiarity with?
None.
What contract have you made with the devil?
I never saw the devil in my life.
Why do you hurt these children?
I have not hurt them.
Did you bring a black man with you today?
I'm an innocent person.
Who do you employ to hurt these
I
children?
employ nobody.
Did you not bid me tempt God and die?
Child, no, never.
They say it is your spectre that comes to them, torments them, tempts them to write in the book. What book do you tempt them with?
There is no book. I am clear.
Have you written
I
the
am
book
clear.
yourself?
No.
If not, tell me how far you have gone in this. Have you not to do with familiar spirits?
I have no familiar spirits.
What they did was they had these pre-trial examinations public. They invited anyone who wanted to come and observe to come and observe.
The magistrates would have the testimony taken down and then determine whether or not they would keep the person. Sometimes they would do little tests. All right, if you're innocent, recite the Lord's Prayer. And whereas most people know it by rote, if you really think about it, you're going to make a mistake.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
Goody, why were you caused to forget our daily bread?
I am but
The
an old
sacrament
woman.
of daily bread.
And I am afeard. I'm afeard of this proceeding.
We shall ask that you be removed and searched again as well for unnatural excrescences of flesh upon your body that shall go far in showing that you are in league with the devil.
They were determined to clean up this mess, to use a contemporary expression. They were going to clean this mess up. And as soon as they made the decision to believe the young girls were credible witnesses,
God controls all things. It is not my doing.
Look to her.
When she invokes God's name.
Goody, is this your doing? Who torments you? What torments you?
Was it the man in black?
No, it was she. Her. The black dog sees me, dragged me through the fire.
She's a church
She sent it to you.
You have a
She
familiar-
sent it to her.
I saw her in the assembly.
No.
This woman,
You
Constable,
church
this woman
member.
sees this.
Are you
woman
certain?
Hold on.
The girls who were afflicted were so real in their accusations and in their fits that many family members would go, well, you must be guilty because these children say you are. They've seen you do these things, and look what's happening to them. So every institution had failed them.
What really made the Salem witchcraft trials outrageous and terribly harmful was the willingness on the part of the court to accept testimony that was very flimsy and to put the lives of human beings at risk by accepting that flimsy testimony.
ultimately, of course, it's the authorities, the judges in the witch hunting trials, who betrayed this society because they refused to listen to the voice of reason of any kind.
We must command that this woman be removed and searched for witches' marks on her body. Constable, midwife.
Can we take her now?
Constable, please remove her.
The power lies with men who are magistrates, men who are theologians, and the power becomes enacted mostly on women's bodies. So there's a strange triangulation of power in which it is women's bodies. There are men who are accused and killed at Salem as well, but most of the men who are accused at Salem are accused because they are married to a woman who's also accused.
Women would be examined by a committee of women for any marks or blemishes called a witch's mark or a witch's teat. And the belief was that if you were a witch and had given your soul to Satan, Satan would exchange to his newly converted witch a demon, a demonic being, in the form of what they called a familiar.
Today, if I go dressed as a witch for Halloween and I'm wearing a black pointy hat and I have a broom, I have a little cat with me, that popular culture representation of the black cat derives from the assumption of the spirit familiar that witches had.
And it would be the witch's job to sustain this familiar on their blood. And the place where the blood was drawn out of the witch's body was this so-called witch's mark.
There's a very gendered representation of how witches work, an inversion of maternal kinds of things.
Should we prick any of them with the needle to see if they bleed?
Nothing at all?
No. Nothing.
She did not seem to feel any pain.
No.
Pins were used, and they would pierce these protuberances of the skin to see if they were natural or unnatural. If no pain was felt or if no blood was drawn, that was considered not natural. It was unnatural.
They were trapped in the morass of different kinds of evidence and unable to sort out different kinds of evidence at all. They pleaded, they put huge pressure on people to confess.
And they began the trials in early June. And at the same time the trials were taking place, you still had more people accused of witchcraft. It had become really a wildfire.
The devil hath been raised in Salem village.
Yeah, it's very important to point out that the court that Phipps established as the Court of Oyer and Terminer is a civil court, and they are prosecuting the witches under the criminal code of the colony.
The first convictions are made swiftly.
She could be most valuable.
Have you a will to engage with the devil?
No.
Massachusetts does not have a religious court. They are prosecuted not under religious laws. So in this sense, these are different than most of the witchcraft cases that take place on the continent of Europe, where there are religious tribunals and religious courts. And that's why the punishment is different here. In Massachusetts, or in England, when people are found guilty of witchcraft, they are sentenced to death, and they are sentenced to death by hanging.
On July the 19th, 1692, Rebecca Nurse and 4 other women were hanged. All the victims protested their innocence right through to the end. None had confessed, as then these women would have had to incriminate other members of the community.
Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Those people who were hanged were not sinners and they weren't saints. They were just average people. Some of them were not very nice people. Others seemed to be almost of an unblemished character. The one quality they had in them that made them different from the 150 other people accused was that at the time of the confrontation of the worst crisis in their life, they choose death over telling a lie.
the most horrible thing about Salem that makes it so distinct and so sad is that all people who were tried pled not guilty. They were all found guilty and sentenced to death.
They would stand on one of the rungs of the ladder, a noose would be put around their neck, and then the term was the executioner would turn them off the ladder, physically taking their feet and just shoving them off of the ladder, and they would strangle to death. What some of the accused understood very quickly was that if you had confessed to witchcraft, they didn't try you right away. The idea was eventually you would get tried, but the people who were really the dangerous people are the people who we knew kind of were witches, but they hadn't confessed to it. And therefore, they went after them first.
So one thing people sometimes say is, well, you know, if everybody who confessed got off, why didn't everybody just confess? Well, a couple of reasons. One, because lying was a mortal sin, and these people actually believed in mortal sin. Why would you live out your life with an assurance of hell after your life was over? And two, because up until this point, there was no guarantee at the beginning of the trial that confession would get you off. That's just how it went in this case, partly because confessed witches could then be pressured to name other confessed witches.
After the witch hunt went on for half a year, in winter 1692, the community of the faithful was about to fall apart once and for all. And community was so very important for the Puritans.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
25 members of the community lost their lives. More than 1/3 of all the inhabitants were in jail. Families torn apart. No one trusted anyone else. In the fall, the fields weren't harvested. Cattle died in the stables. And yet new witches were interrogated. And even the leading lights of the community were denounced. Rich businessmen, men of the cloth, and their wives.
The Salem witchcraft trials have come to be regarded as the absolute worst thing the Puritans ever did.
The inhabitants of Salem were stuck in a trap of their own making, and which they could no longer escape of their own volition.
Forget not your children. Forget not your bride.
The trial is so hard to bear, but for the sense of sin, deliver me, O Lord.
It was too catastrophic. It was too traumatic for them. And so the community would never be the same. They couldn't just go back to the way things were.
Many members of the community started to feel guilty. They asked themselves how things could have come to this.
We are gathered here today as we must, for the devil is among us. Many of us have been weak. We have forsaken our scripture. We have forgotten our Christian duty. Cannot one of you look me in the eye?
By late summer, there are numerous critics who are beginning to express their concern for the witch trials. And one of these men is Thomas Brattle, who's one of the leading, he's a merchant, but he's also one of the leading scientific thinkers in Boston in his day.
and to say, you know, we are not using our common sense here. Spectral evidence should never have been allowed.
Thomas Brattle resolutely opposed the hysteria of the witch hunt. He studied mathematics at Harvard and was a member of the Royal Society, and thus of the scientific elite of his day. He and other members argued rationally. Brattle publicly attacked the illogical proof the court passed down, upon which the governor of the Crown Colony dissolved the Salem court.
Better that we let 100 witches go free than harm one innocent person. And really the witch trials come to an end when Massachusetts agrees that, yes, witches are probably real, but spectral evidence and the touch test and the evil eye are not acceptable evidence. And that's what Brattle and others are arguing for.
And what happened during the witchcraft trials is the people, when they finally discovered what had happened, and that innocent blood had been shed largely as a result of the influence of individuals who thought they were doing God's work, but in fact were causing more of a problem. There was a secularization of society. A new paradigm is set up in Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Only Tituba, the slave, had to remain in prison until a new buyer was found for her.
If you were to return to Salem Village after the last execution took place, you would wander through a town that had been through probably the greatest crisis any community could possibly have gone through.
It must have been a very terrible thing for Salem Village to deal with, and it clearly, we know, it took years, if not decades, for them to heal from those trials, as the community had to really sort of deal with that aftermath where villager turned against villager in the trials.
The 550 people who lived here either had someone accused or an accuser within their family, sometimes both. It was a profound, terrible thing that they went through.
And yet, miraculously, it would be a town where people would continue to live.
In the 21st century, Salem is a prosperous little town near Boston. The witch trials of 1692 are now marketed by the tourism industry. Halloween and the witching capital. But Salem was also a turning point.
One of the big conclusions to draw from Salem is the danger that can befall people from the best of all possible intentions. The people who conducted the Salem witch trials believed that they were doing the right thing. And that rightness resulted in such a grave injustice, I think, is one of the reasons that our culture hasn't been able to let Salem go. Seeing women hang, is that going to make things better? They thought that it would. It didn't.
Human nature keeps repeating it, and it's in a different guise each time.
The persecution of individuals simply for being different has persisted even after Salem.
Can we recognize it the next time it comes?
As long as we have scapegoating, as long as we have prejudice and hatred and bigotry, as long as we have to talk about race prejudice and the issue in America today of Black Lives Matter, we're going to have some form of witchcraft, right?
Back then, only 550 souls lived in Salem. Our modern world is far more complex. It seems enlightened, but are we so unlike those people in the past?
It has so many echoes in our own time. It isn't just in America that right now that we're living that story. It's in Europe, all over the world.
Not until 2001 did the governor of Massachusetts declare the last victims innocent. In the mid-20th century, both theater and film ensured the events in Salem moved back into the limelight, driven also by the experiences made in our times with fear, denunciation, and mass mania.
A good thing that came out of the witchcraft, that the individuals still can count in history. And although they were regaled and spat upon in their own time, today we remember them, and today we kind of honor them, and they've become, in fact, heroes rather than villains.
The witch hunt in Salem has long since been and gone, but it remains a blemish in American history. Later generations were to view the trials as a symbol of injustice and persecution. It does not suffice to inscribe the ideals of liberty, justice, plurality, and religious tolerance in constitutions. They need to be a lived reality and, if necessary, defended against all forms of injustice.